Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, Nick Morton. My next guest is an actor and writer and stand-up comedian who grew up in a pretty rough section of Philadelphia, where just not getting your ass kicked every day was a constant struggle. He found booze and comedy early on as effective means of escape, and eventually found himself with a pretty successful stand-up career. It seems his recovery was precipitated by a couple near brushes with real trouble, and he had somewhere along the way picked up enough self-knowledge to look for help. We talked for a while after I stopped recording, a choice I now really regret, and he said that sobriety had given him the opportunity to finally apply on a daily basis all the perspective he's picked up along the way, and just be grateful for each day he has here on Earth. Won't you please welcome a guy who's known in my circle of recovery as Philly Mike. In my phone, you're Philly Mike.
Yeah.
So I guess you were born in Philadelphia?
Born in Philadelphia, yeah,
Right.
and in Northeast Philadelphia, and I mean that's it's funny. I was thinking about it before I got on with you, and I mean that's really where it kind of began for me. I mean I was crushed as a kid. I was just crushed. I lived on a block that was a tough block in Philly, and I didn't like the fight, and I was kind of a tiny guy, and I just got my head kicked in, like from my recollect, like daily,
Right.
and it was always a battle of how I was going to get home, what different route I had to take home. Like I would go, I would take all these circuitous routes to get home. I mean, it was real, and that and the trauma that still still exists. I mean, I still have like nightmares about certain guys, and a couple of those guys who used to pick on me. It's funny. I just talked to a friend and talked about like they're not alive anymore. I mean, they've gone to jail, and and I don't miss them. But it was just crushing. And I didn't have any. Yeah.
What's that neighborhood like? Just to give us a sense of like I mean, you've written about it a bit, like in your screenplays and stuff. So, but I don't like the sort of like ethnic makeup, the like socioeconomic vibe. Like, how would you characterize it?
It's lower middle class, I would
Right.
say. It's that particular neighborhood. I mean, there's two different neighborhoods. Basically, I went to my parents took me out of that neighborhood.
Right.
And actually sent me into a worse neighborhood, but a better school,
Right.
just to get me away from the kids, because I would have been crushed if I went to that high school. So they did that.
And your parents were together?
They were up until about 20 years ago. Yeah.
And like, what did they do for work?
My dad was a carpenter, and my mom was, I mean, she took a bunch of odd jobs, but she was a nursery school teacher. That was her primary job.
And did you have siblings?
3 sisters.
3 sisters.
Yeah.
Are they older or younger?
One older, one in the middle with me, younger, and then one's a baby. She just turned 40. Yeah.
And so like the guys that you were like deking around to avoid, like who were these dudes? Just like neighborhood kids?
They were guys from the neighborhood that saw that I didn't like the fight. When you don't like the fight, you wear it like, I mean, your eyes just give off a certain sense.
Right. Just leave me alone. Stay away from me. Right?
And it can be the slightest thing. It can be as simple as like, somebody says something to me and they see me, vulnerable.
Right.
And I'm going to fight you. Oh, he didn't say anything back. Let's go after him. And for me, I played sports. So that kind of saved me at times a little bit, but it was one of those things. We would play a pickup game, and then right after, when I was walking home, they would there's the guy that we can pick on,
Right.
But the other way of keeping me out of trouble was being a clown in class.
Right.
So that was way number 2. But again, once the laugh subsided, it was like, yeah, that's not funny anymore. Let's go. It was one of those things that. And I've talked about this before, but I was very tiny, like 4 foot with a huge head.
Right.
Yeah. So I've talked about that, but
No, I haven't really heard. I mean, I've heard in like meetings that like other guys sort of like doing a callback to a previous meeting where like they mention it, but I mean I've only really heard it in passing. I guess like so but I mean that is sort of like the actor's build, it's like you're kind of not that tall and you have a big head. I mean that's sort of the sort of famous type, right?
yeah, I mean, just to give you an example, like a few years back, I had to go. I went to a bachelor party and we did those dune buggy things, and it was a bunch of 40-year-old men, dune buggy. They had to try on helmets, and this is like I've been through this 1,000 times, and I said to them, guys, you're going to need something larger than that, and they were all like, no, this is the biggest. Trust me, this fits everyone. This is the biggest helmet you could possibly get. No one in the world has a head that won't fit into this. And inevitably, they all stand around, all 20 guys, and they watch me try on this thing that once it goes on my head, looks like a yarmulke,
Right.
And it's like, so it is a thing. It's an act like I have an 8.25, which is a crazy size head, but
and so would like neighborhood kids, like they'd just be like,
yeah, it was box or a big head or whatever,
really fucking clever.
Yeah, nothing clever at all. But it crushed. It was like taking I was such a sensitive kid, man.
Sure.
I was such a and that's where, that's when I go in to these meetings. I mean, that's the one thing I feel like we all have in common.
Yeah.
That we're all very, very sensitive,
Totally.
Totally. And for me, when I got to 7th grade and guys started drinking and I saw an opportunity to drink, I was like, and I'll never forget the first time I was at home playing Monopoly with my sister and my parents went out and I knew they had a liquor cabinet and I thought that I had no idea how to pour a drink.
Right.
But I knew what a screwdriver was.
Right.
And I knew what orange juice and vodka looked like. So I put them together, but I thought half and half was fine.
Sounds reasonable.
And next thing I know, I'm playing Monopoly. I'm throwing the car around in the hat. And I'm 11 years old. And I go up to bed and almost died because I threw up in my sleep.
Right.
I had no idea. My parents wake me up and that was their first sign that, we had a challenge on our hands.
Did they know that they could tell it was booze because they could smell it, or?
Oh my God. Yeah. It was all over my pillow, everything. Yeah. It was just vodka, And
were you the only kid drinking that night, or were your sisters drinking also?
I was the only one drinking.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. They had no idea. My sister had no idea who this lunatic was.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But from then on, and I'm sure a lot of guys tell similar stories. A lot of people tell similar stories. Like that was my, sort of salvation, that's what gave me superpowers,
And so did you start like, had you moved to the new school by the time 7th grade started?
So then that was 7th and 8th grade was mostly in the woods, near our, as far as kids are concerned. No, not until 9th grade.
Right.
The guys that, I had one or two guys that were my friends that were considered like sort of the nerds in grade school and we hung out. But the drinking was actually with a couple guys on the team. But then when I got to 9th grade.
On the football team or like?
No, I played baseball.
Baseball, right.
Yeah. But never played football. But then when I went to high school, the next year, it truthfully saved my life. It absolutely saved my life because it took me out of that neighborhood. No one knew anything about the head. Right. No one knew anything about it. It was like starting over again. And it was great. It was in a really rough neighborhood, but and that's where, a lot of my stories come from because I took an hour and a half like bus. It was a bus, an L, and a trolley to school every day.
How did your parents get you into that different school? They just like applied you out because they were like, we want to put you in a better school where you're not gonna like get your fucking, where you can thrive as opposed to being, picked on.
I think it was. I think it was. I think there were a couple reasons behind it. My sister excelled in school. My older sister
Right.
did really well in school, and I did fine. But she excelled. She got her doctorates in math eventually, and
Wow.
so they put her in a private school. And I think they saw, especially towards the end, they didn't. I never told them about what was happening until
Right.
the end. Until it
Right.
got so bad in 7th and 8th grade that I was like, I can't. They just saw me coming home, and I wasn't talking to anyone. So
Right.
they knew that something was up, and they had me take the test for the school, and they didn't have the money to do it, but they gave me a grant, the school, and it was at the time, that's when you could go to a private school for like $2,000,
Right.
500, a year. And with a grant, it was like, it ended up being like 1,000 or 1,200, but whatever it was, but still more than a public school.
Right.
And that saved my life, because it was an all boys school and I met new kids. And but what I did more than anything was found kids that liked to drink, and that their parents let them drink at home. And I drank more in high school than, or at least as much as I did in college.
Right.
We could go to bars in North Philly at 15 years old, and there was, you just get deep in a lot of different areas in North Philly. North Philly was the crack capital of the country in the 90s.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah.
And so did you experiment with crack in that period at all, or
No?
So how did you, like, I guess, how did you identify the guys who were like the party guys? Was that like a crew at this school? Was it like pretty obvious to tell?
Well, I got along with the funny guys, and
Right.
the guys who had a sense of humor, and they tend to be the guys that drink sometimes. And these particular guys happen to be wealthy.
Right.
That was the different socioeconomic classes from all over Philadelphia. I mean, that was what was really interesting. I mean,
And was that eye-opening from your neighborhood to suddenly like be in this world of like, oh shit, these guys, this is what money is like?
100%. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I was hanging out like on the weekends, over a friend's house. His dad was a doctor and he was gone. And
Right.
he had a pool table, and he would show me his Porsche that he was going to get when he was 17. And we would drink Molson and Moosehead every week, every week we get 2-3 cases and just get shit faced at his place. And my parents knew nothing. My parents got permission from his mother. So it was
also
fine.
It's like, you're at this school where it's like it's like a better school, kids are motivated, like you're hanging out with, good kids, right?
Yeah. And that's right. And as long as you get good grades, I mean, that was the one thing with my parents. They were very strict on grades, but I had amazing teachers in high school, man. Like all I had to do is listen in class and I was good.
Yeah.
They were that, those teachers that like, especially with the basics, like algebra and math, like if you have a good teacher, I mean, you get everything you need to know in class for the most part. And then I tried to follow in my sister's footsteps and would take AP courses, and I would just get crushed. But except with Latin, which I ended up teaching for a couple years. I had amazing. People ask me why I did, but I just had amazing Latin teachers, classical language teachers in high school. So I ended up just taking it along, and next thing I know, I was teaching at my old high school after college.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
And so how does your sort of how does your drinking evolve over the course of high school? Does it get ugly? Does it get dangerous? I mean, are there times where you're like, oh fuck?
Yeah, I mean, I got very, very lucky many times, very lucky. It's so funny with DUIs. It's like my dad, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind me sharing this because he used to drink. He doesn't drink anymore. And he got a DUI 10 years ago, 12 years ago, for coming back from a Christmas party. He had like three drinks in.
Right.
And he got a DUI.
Right.
And Nick, I got pulled over on the Jersey State Turnpike
Right.
with a 6-pack in my thing. And the guy asked me to he literally, I thought I was done. I thought I was like half a 6-pack. I drank 3. And the guy says to me, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to take the rest of the 6-pack and I want you to place it behind your car and then go back and sit in the car. And he comes back, Nick, 10 minutes later. I'm thinking he's bringing another trooper. I'm about to get arrested. I'm in deep trouble. And he comes and he gives me a citation.
Right.
And says, I'm not going to, it's like I got, and that used to happen to us all the time in high school.
Right.
And it's incredible. And then when I got, and then I was in New York for years. So I would always take the subway everywhere. Yeah. Or a cab.
And so you graduated from high school. Where do you go to college?
New York, in Fordham University in New York.
Right.
Yeah. And again, man, I had angels looking over me, man. I got put on probation for drinking, and
at Fordham.
And
I mean, I got in a little bit of trouble in college, but like you had to behave pretty badly to get in trouble at college, I thought.
Well, you want to hear what happened, man? So we had me and my buddy from high school were roommates, and we had a guy, we called him Gunk because he was in a band called Gunk.
Right.
And he never stayed at our place. He would stay down the hall with his buddies, but he had a key to our place. So he was stealing our beers every week. Like not just beer, like he would steal like a 30-pack.
Right.
And so like of Strohs, I think at the time when Strohs were in fashion. But and one weekend it happened time and time again. And one weekend I came back drunk and I realized that he was stealing shit. So I went down to that room. I walk in the room and there's our beers all over the floor. So I hit a computer screen. I didn't mean to break it, but my fist went through the screen. Right. When they had the old desk. Yeah. My fist went through the screen and I walked out and there happened to be this kid sleeping in there. Right. And long story short, he said that he thought he saw me, blah, blah, blah. I ended up going to the dean's office. I was in there every day for a week. And I never lied, Nick. I don't lie. Having said that, because I felt like it was justified, I didn't think it was a lie. They were stealing stuff from me. I hit the thing unintentionally, broke the thing. Yeah. So she asked me every day for a week. We became best friends. Me and this team. She was new. She was like 30 years old, and she was the dean of student affairs. And I'd spend an hour and a half in her office. And at the end of every session, she'd say, "So, did you do it?" And I'd say, "No." She's like, "I want you back here tomorrow." And what happened was that year I ended up, I didn't get probation for that, but I ended up getting nailed drinking one more time, and boom, I was automatically put on probation. And then, but here's the crazy thing. The next year my dad was going to take me out of school because he couldn't afford it. And and a kid got fired who was an RA. And guess who called me up and asked me if I wanted to be an RA? No fucking
way. That's amazing.
Dude, I just saw her daughter last year at a festival. Her daughter, who's 22 years old now. We still keep in touch.
That's so cool.
Her husband is head of police. Oh my God, if she heard those prizes. Oh yeah. But her husband is head of police in Brunswick. And they're awesome. They're absolutely awesome.
It's amazing when someone sees that thing in you that nobody else seems to see and takes a chance, like to make the kid who's punched the computer screen and is lying about it, the RA. Yeah. Because she gets that you've got character is really, that's pretty unique. That's so cool.
Yeah, it was, man, I felt really, really fortunate like that. And that's what's so, I mean, not to get deep into our business, but that's what's so crazy about this business is that doesn't, any other business people see who you are for who you are.
Sure.
This is the only business that it's a lot more challenging than that. It's a lot more complicated, as you know.
Oh
Yeah.
man, talk about incomprehensible demoralization.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so then what happens? Like, I assume you graduate, and do you study acting and writing and film stuff? At what point does that sort of become your thing?
So I did stand up for the first time in high school when I was
Right.
16. I ended up being on the student council because I wanted to do this speech in front of the school, and I did that, and that led to going to a leadership camp, and there it was the best experience of my life that week at that camp, because
Where was the camp? Out in the woods or something?
in Pennsylvania, yeah, out in the
Right.
middle, and it was just like girls were into me that were never, like, I never had good looking girls into me, but I was, at the time, I was funny, and I was writing for the first time, and I wrote this whole set for a talent showcase at the end of the camp, and it was the greatest experience of my life, and it wasn't the first time, because I was always clowning, but it was the first time that I really said, this is really what I want to do with my life. But then from then on, I didn't know how I was going to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I had no family members or no one that I knew that even had an interest in anything like that. So it was, then began the journey,
So,
yeah.
and were you sort of pursuing that through college?
Yeah. But I did stand up in college, and I was acting in college, but I took a couple courses, but it wasn't until I got out of college that I did a play. It was actually a friend saw me in the play, and he just said to me, he said, dude, you're good, but you need technique. And so I went back to a 2-year program in New York.
What did you study in college? What was your major?
I majored in classical languages
right.
and communications.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and how's your drinking through college? I mean, it's normal stuff, or is it like?
Yeah, I mean, I tried a lot of things for the first time. Some, I did, I did, and I don't talk about this often because it never became a thing, but I did try crack and mescaline and all this stuff for the first time.
Right.
But nothing, the thing, and not even cocaine, man. Like it wasn't really it's in a lot of people's stories.
Sure.
And it just wasn't, I loved alcohol, man.
Right.
And so it never, I don't know what it was, but I think I will tell you this. When I was 19 years old, I was working at the Comic Strip Live, which is a comedy club on the Upper East Side. And there was a guy there. I won't mention his name, but there were a bunch of guys there. And they would just be, he was a manager there, and he would just be moody most of the night. And then all of a sudden, I noticed he would get in a really good mood and start talking about the most inane things. And, it later became sort of public knowledge that he had a coke problem.
Right.
And I just remember that. And it just wasn't, I was like, I don't want to, I already talk about nonsense. I was like, I don't want to talk about stuff with confidence that I don't really, so it just never became a thing. It was more alcohol, and it was more my constitution, Nick. Like, I have a very strong, I could drink forever. And people wouldn't, and I'm serious when I say this, and people wouldn't know the difference.
Right.
But my hangovers, especially towards the end, and the anxiety,
right,
and the relationship challenges with family, and for all of that stuff just became so, and financial challenges, it just became so much that, like, when I stopped 3 years ago, I was done. Like, I was absolutely done. I just, but for college, getting back to college, I mean, college was just, it was a series of sort of lucky breaks with regard to the alcohol. You know, I just got, you know, it never, I was always functional, you know, it never really crushed me in any other way except the demoralization, you know, and just like.
But then that drags on for, how old are you now?
48.
So that drags on for 20 or so years after college of just like drinking too much, bumming yourself out.
Oh, but but going to AA, you know, like stopping, starting, stopping.
Oh,
like
really?
Yeah.
When did you decide that like, oh, fuck, I want to stop?
Well, so the thing with me, Nick, and I bet you we're similar this way. I may be wrong, but like I went to therapy for the first time when I was 15 years old.
Right.
Like I started meditating like 13 years ago. Like I know I had awareness.
You knew the shit. Right.
I had awareness about my life. And so I was able to stop and start and, you know, figure out, oh, this is, you know, prepare for an audition the night before and not drink 2 nights before. Like I was very much, I could binge and, but, and keep a steady, but for me, you know, I had a big break, I guess about 8 years ago. And
what was it?
Well, I got a series regular on a television show.
What was the show?
What was Living Loaded? It was a pilot,
right?
That we shot, but it didn't go. You know,
right?
But it was the guys that did It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Right. Wow.
And yeah, it was a great opportunity. It was great, and I did it at the time with no representation through something that I shot,
right.
and basically, like after that, I tested for a bunch of things and was up for a bunch of things, and then things slowly started to subside, and my drinking got heavier. You know,
right.
It became like every day, and I actually like would have long conversations with Eric, you know, our friend Eric, and he would tell me about the room that he was in. Because my experiences with the rooms were not a good experience.
Yeah, so when did you first like step into a room?
Oh, 15 years ago, 17 years ago.
And what prompted that?
Just anxiety,
right?
You know, from a hangover. You know,
how did you get in there? Like, did you have buddies who were sober?
I looked it up. I just looked it up. Yeah, I just looked up online the closest place to go, and I went to the one that was right on the church on Franklin right here. Yeah, the one on Franklin right by.
Oh yeah, I know that meeting.
Yeah.
And I've never been to it, but a guest on this podcast goes there. And how was that?
I just felt like the intellect didn't feel like it was there, and it felt like people were struggling a lot more. Again, I go back to like the work that I had done.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, and I'll be honest with you, Nick. Like it's not that I at all think. I mean, part of what drew me to that room, the one on Prospect, is how intelligent these guys spoke about their experiences that I could relate to. But if I have someone that's not, you know, getting out of bed still and they're 2 years sober or whatever, it's for me, it was a little more challenging to connect to that. Whereas a person that's struggling with the day-to-day, but understands the whole scope of things, it was a little easier to connect to that. I don't know. My experience with the couple rooms that I went to, I just wasn't connecting with the people.
I got a bunch of questions, I guess. When you ended up in therapy at 15, what was that? What prompted that?
Fighting with my parents.
They were like, we got to get it. We got to figure out. So were you an angry kid?
Yeah. I mean, because I was getting all that abuse in school. So I would come home, but you know, and then when I got to high school, I had a case of the fuckets, you know, where I was like, you know, I was very, I mean, I ran away from home when I was 16 for like 2 weeks. It was the best 2 weeks of my life.
Where'd you go?
I went to like I had all the bus passes from, and I went to my high school friends. Like they had no idea. It was during the summer, so like their parents didn't know.
It's amazing.
The one parent was like, Mike's been here 4 days. Like, do they know where he is? And I just, and truthfully, it was because I didn't have a relationship with my dad at that time.
Right. And
I-
we should make a movie about that, like a small movie where like the 5 days that Mike was AWOL. It'd be pretty.
Yeah.
The 2 weeks.
Oh, it'd be a great little film. I got Poison Oak. I met the girl. I met the girl that I ended up dating for 4 years. I mean, literally, Nick, the best 2 weeks. Like anytime I hear that somebody ran away from home, and again, how much did I really run away from home? I mean, there were no cell phones, so they couldn't contact me. But still,
You were in the neighborhood, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, they I think the parents probably contacted them in hindsight. I mean, I'm sure, but literally, I had poison oak so bad on both arms and up my neck, and I met the girl that I ended up at a concert at the Ziggy Marley at the Mann Music Center, and just had the best 2 weeks. It was amazing. So I recommend it if you're a young kid.
Yeah, totally. It's amazing, especially now. I mean, I have a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old, and then like just the lack of independence in their lives is just like I find it frustrating that just because like living in LA and it's just hard for them to like just do shit on their own.
Yeah.
So and then how do you end up in LA?
Was that 16 years ago, 17 years ago? I had really good representation back in New York, and I was doing stand up, and I was a regular in a lot of the clubs in New York. And I mean, that's a whole nother story, but the people that I met doing stand up, I mean, just amazing. And that was a big choice that I made. I mean, I came out here. I was up for a role in The Office of the construction worker. I auditioned for it.
Wow.
And I was up for it. And I just was like, this is it. I felt like, not this is it, but I felt like this is where I need to be right now.
Right.
And so when that fell through, I was out here, and my manager back in New York, who owned a comedy club, he owned Stand Up New York. He said, you should come back.
Yeah.
And I said, no, I'm going to stay out here. And I did, but shortly after that, I stopped doing stand up because I didn't like it out here, and I didn't like doing stand up out here, and I didn't enjoy the road. So, and that's when I started. Mainly a couple years after, started shooting my own stuff. But what got me out here was. But I lost. I mean, it's crazy, Nick. I got representation and lost my representation almost like 2 to 3 months after I got out here.
Right.
And, but I just, when I make a decision to do something, man, I stick with it. I don't like, and that's the thing with AA for me. When I finally made a decision, like I'm done drinking, like I said to myself, I'm done. Like, that's it. And so I haven't really, I mean, it took about a year or so before I felt pretty confident about it. But and it's funny, one of the questions you asked the gentleman that I listened to was you're talking about what's life like, how does life open up for you, and I think like everything that I did before was revolved around drinking. Everything I planned everything around drinking, like sporting events, fishing, weekends, anything. And when you don't do that and you start to feel comfortable with, I mean, think about it, the amount of time that you fill your life with things that are good, hopefully,
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I can still find ways to fill it with
Bad stuff.
Yeah. But
how did you end up then the last time finally sort of coming into recovery permanently?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I was in Philly, and I again, should have got a DUI. Like should have got like just was finishing up shooting Kensington.
Right.
And we were shooting and went to a Phillies game and just had way too much to drink. And again, I had been talking to the guy that was in that room, and he had been saying, "It's there for you, man. It's there for you." Blah blah blah.
This is the other Nick M.
No, Eric.
Oh, right.
Yeah, Eric. Yeah. Yeah, he just had always mentioned this.
How did you know him?
We went to acting school together.
Oh.
Yeah, I met him 20 years ago. Yeah. And we used to party together. But
This is Eric.
Painter Eric? I know that's
Oh yeah. Totally. Know exactly what you're talking
about. Yeah. And I drove home that night and somehow made it. And I started to when I got home and I realized how much I had drank, probably the next morning, I was like, this is like, and I had already been thinking about it for a while. And then I proceeded the next day to get hammered on the plane and smoke my last cigarette and do all that stuff. And then when I got back, the next day I went to a meeting and
Did you go to the meeting at Prospect?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny, when I first met you, it was in the bar of the Marriott,
Moxie,
Denver. Yeah, the Moxie, and you were there with that project Sober Companion, where you had played the Sober Companion in the pilot, and there was a guy from that room who had co-written it. Did you co-write that as well, or were you just
No, there's a guy. There's a guy from the room that co-wrote it with another guy that was also. He's not with the program anymore,
right.
But he was. That also wrote it as well and directed it. And but yeah, and it's funny. I look at that film, and I just see myself, and I'm just so full of alcohol. Like I'm so bloated,
You look so thin. I mean, because like whatever, I've seen your face like on the big screen, like, and watching you here, whatever. It's just different in person too. But
yeah.
Like you're so thin.
Yeah, it's funny. People would come up to me, after seeing that, and they'd say, "Did you gain weight for the part?" Like,
right?
No, it was, and I didn't remember at the time. I didn't even, and I still.
Well, because I remember at the time, like you guys were we were sitting there at the bar. I recognized you because I had just seen the film, and so I started talking to you, and then Nick showed up, and you guys were he was sober.
Yeah,
he wasn't drinking, and then they were kind of teasing you about not drinking, but then you ordered a drink, and I was like, he's not sober.
No.
But at the same time, you didn't have like a, like it didn't seem like your relationship with alcohol was that fraught at the time. It seemed like, I think you had like a beer or a shandy or something like very light or something. I was like, well, whatever. It didn't seem like you had a drinking problem, but
yeah.
the eye of the beholder. So
yeah, and I'm also pretty good about keeping it closeted a lot of time. I mean, a lot of my drinking happened behind closed doors.
Sure.
Which is but I wasn't I liked whiskey, but I wasn't I was a 13, 14 beer drinker, like
that will put the weight on.
Oh yeah, and from a kid. I mean, from when I was a kid. I mean, that's all I really enjoyed. But part of that is because I just didn't have a good relationship with. I mean, if I was good on with liquor, it just put me in a super bad place. With relationships and stuff like that. I mean, literally physically a bad place.
Right.
And I don't mean abuse. I mean, like, wetting the bed every night, like stuff like that, where it's like, what, that's crazy. Anyway.
When I was drinking, I would get into these fights with my wife where I couldn't remember what I was angry. Like midway through the fight, I couldn't remember what I was angry about.
Oh my God.
And I would get so angry that I couldn't remember why I was angry.
Oh my God, yeah.
And then I would be like driving home, or she'd be driving home, and I'd be shit-faced, and I would be just like holding on to my anger, trying to remember why I had every right to be angry. And then I could never do it. I still can't really do it. I'm not very good at holding a grudge, unfortunately. I wish I was better at it a little bit.
Yeah. It gets a lot easier.
They deserve the grudge.
Yeah. It gets a lot easier when, I mean, look, man, I'm getting married in a month.
Right.
You know, I've never been engaged. I never thought I'd be engaged. I mean, that's like, you want to talk about the power of sobriety. I mean,
and how long ago did you guys meet?
9 years ago.
Oh, interesting. So she knew you as a drinky person.
Oh yeah.
Right.
And she sees it now, meaning now she's like, couldn't be more proud of the fact that I'm sober. But at first, I think it was not that she was a big drinker. I mean, she wasn't, but I think at first she didn't understand. I mean, she understood why I was doing it, but part of her probably felt like all of a sudden, like Mike wasn't going to want to do anything fun anymore, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But now that we don't fight in the way that we used to, and that we're getting married, and that I let stuff go, and because it's so funny when you describe that holding on to the anger when you can't even remember what the hell you're talking. I mean, Nick, it's like I can't. I've done that so many times, like not like, because she's really smart. I'm sure your wife is smart as well.
Yeah, sure.
At least is super smart. So like, even if I'm on my game and I'm sober, I still have a challenge.
Right.
So now you add alcohol to the situation,
right.
And it's like I might as well just throw in the white towel, you know.
And so have you guys been dating the whole sort of 9 years?
No.
Right.
We were together, and then she moved to New York for a year, and you know, we split up. She's significantly younger than me. She's 10 years younger than me, and but we've been solid for the last 5 years. Yeah.
And do you think you'll ever go back to stand up? I mean, I'm amazed you had like a real fucking stand-up career in New York. I mean, like, whatever, I've been doing stand-up for 5 years. I think that there is nothing more intoxicating than doing stand-up. I mean, I didn't know that about you. I didn't realize that you'd had I mean, it makes so much sense to me now, like how you sort of morph from, you know, acting to writing. Do you miss it?
I do, but I miss New York. I miss doing it in New York. I did not. I can't explain it. Well, yes, I can. I mean, it's a competitiveness and a vanity about doing it in LA that I just, and I had a show. I produced a show at El Cid that I did, you know, twice a week. Wow. And then I would do the Comedy Store, and I would do Laugh Factory, and I had a list of all the different, you know, open mics in the area. And I mean, when I was in New York, it's funny when I talk to people about stand up, like, they're like, oh, I'm going to get up next week and I'm going to do it. You know, I'm going to do a couple the week after that. And like, when I was in New York, Nick, I was performing open mics 3 times a night.
Yeah, sure.
You know, I mean, it's like Hamburger Harry's, you know, here they have the laundromat there that they used to do, where they used to do stand up, and you know, and then ultimately, like, you start to get into some of the clubs, but I miss it. But I didn't like the road. It was just too lonely, I guess. Yeah. And I didn't.
And you end up in some shitty venue where Nobody, nobody's fucking paying attention to you, and you're like,
yeah.
I prepared for this. What?
When you have to prepare your material for a certain intellect,
Right.
Yeah. And yeah, it's sort of, and ultimately, I wasn't a joke writer. I was more of a storyteller,
right?
Which I'm sure you are as well. So I was able to take a lot of those stories and figure out ways to use it in
Totally
filmmaking, and but I do in answer to your question, I do miss it, and we talk about going back to New York quite often, and if we do,
right,
I may get back because there are two, I'll write stuff that's more for film, and then but I also get jokes in my head or long stories that I'm like, that's great for stand-up. So
and how have you sort of reconciled the trauma of your youth with who you are now?
Oh man, that's a good question.
Because that's intense shit. I mean, it's funny. I was in my therapist's office 2 years ago. I started seeing a new therapist, and we started talking about shit that happened when I was a kid, and then we were talking about shit that's happening in my life now, and he was like, "What are you afraid of in my real life now? Why does that panic you?" And I'm like, "Because I think I'm going to get hit in the face." And it's like, there is nothing in my life now. There's no situation I am in where I'm going to get hit in the face, but that's still what a part of me thinks that's going to fucking happen. And obviously that's not constructive,
yeah. But Nick, what's funny about you saying that is that, those moments when you feel like that, I think what we can do now is I observe it and I figure out a way to write it down on paper,
right,
and make art, because I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean,
right.
Moments where I feel uncomfortable, moments I feel like somebody, why is this happening to me right now? Why do I feel like this? I mean, those moments, I think as the years wore on, I started to be able to take those experiences and make art from it, or put it down on paper and record it. But I stuff still comes up all the time. But I think one of the things that I've been able to do is strengthen the relationship with my father, and that's helped out a lot. So I put a lot of the focus on that. But I'm still scared of everything, man. I mean, I still don't I come from a certain place, so there is confrontation naturally. I mean, I get defensive about certain things, right, and I feel it in my chest,
sure,
and it comes in my throat. But ultimately, I like to put people at ease. I'm a people pleaser, sure, and that comes, that's a real challenge for me, because it comes from that place of always wanting to put the bully at ease.
Yeah.
So he doesn't punch me in the face.
It's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it definitely comes from there. But
you've sort of reconciled with your old man.
I always go back to him, man, because we weren't cool for a long time,
right,
but at a certain point, you realize that there's no using him as an excuse as to why I'm acting the way I'm acting now, or why things are the way they are now. It's my responsibility. For a long time, financially, I like the guy, he's a Marine, and he's very stoic, and he wasn't a great communicator.
Right. Sure.
At a certain point, I realized that there's no 50-50 here. It's got to be 70% me and 30% him.
Right.
Meaning I gotta pull, it out of him. I always say to I said to him the other day, I said, it's like my dad, our relationship, it's like taking an old lawnmower out of the shed after a winter that it's been sitting in there. You try to start it as much as you want, but you got to prime it for like 20 minutes before it's ready to go.
Yeah.
And that's how our relationship is. Like, I'll get on the phone with him. We'll be talking for 15 minutes about stuff that is useless information. And then I'll just say to him, what's going on? What's going on? And then finally we break it down and we get to something that really matters. And for years, especially, well, childhood, I didn't even speak to him, but for years after that, my high school years, when I wasn't emotionally intelligent enough to understand, I would just say, fuck you, you don't want to come 50, and it was just a big F you, but now we get along really well now, especially the last 3 or 4 years, but I'd say the last 10, we've been pretty solid. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Mike, this has been great. I've known you for a while, but I really didn't know your story, and it's really cool to hear it.
Awesome, man. Yeah, it was so much fun, Nick. Thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it. It's such a great thing you're doing.
Thanks for listening. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/thedrunkalogs.